The first time he tried to smile his way out of a cell, it almost worked. The deputy on duty recognized her jawline first, then his eyes, then her name on the paperwork. Cole Maddox, son of Victor Maddox. A name that had filled movie posters, red carpets, and late-night talk shows for over 3 decades. The hero of courtroom thrillers, gritty dramas, and one Oscar-winning performance where he played a wrongly accused man fighting a corrupt system. In the movies, Victor always walked out of the courtroom victorious. In real life, his son walked into one already believing he would. He was wrong. Because today, the man waiting for him on a bench was not a director, not a producer, not a studio head. It was Judge Joseph Wapner. And Wapner didn't deal in rewrites, retakes, or special treatment. He dealt in reality. Cole Maddox entered the courtroom like it was a press conference. His hands were cuffed, yes. His orange jumpsuit was traded for a plain, dark suit that didn't quite hide the jailhouse stiffness in his shoulders. But his eyes still carried that familiar gleam, the one people get when they've never truly heard the word no. He had the face of someone used to front row seats and VIP entrances. Late 20s, tall, lean, with a gym-honed body that lived more on camera than in discipline. His hair was a little too perfect, a carefully maintained mess that said reckless without ever being unstyled. Light stubble traced his jaw, calculated to look accidental and dangerous. He walked with the swagger of someone who had never stood in a real line in his life. The cameras caught everything. They always did. Because this wasn't just another defendant. This was a name, the son of a legend, on a docket that did not care. Cole flicked his gaze lazily around the room, sizing it up. The benches, the spectators, the bailiffs. The low hum of whispered recognition swept through the gallery as people leaned in, nudging each other. That's him. That's Victor Maddox's kid. Did you see the footage? Phones had already seen more of this case than any person in the courtroom. Grainy night vision clips, shaky street camera angles, and frantic commentary from strangers online. It started with a bar. It ended with broken glass, bruises, and a man in a hospital bed. What the world hadn't seen yet was the part that mattered now. The part where the son of a famous man tried to use his last name to step over something he'd never faced before: consequences. On the bench, Judge Joseph Wapner watched in silence. He had seen celebrities before, politicians, business magnates, people who walked into his courtroom convinced that the laws were suggestions, optional, flexible, negotiable. He watched the way Cole sat, reckless ease, spine not quite straight, one shoulder tilted back, a small, crooked smirk playing at the edge of his mouth like this was an inconvenient formality before the real conversation started somewhere else, behind closed doors. With the right people. Wapner also saw the details the cameras might miss, the faint tightening of the jaw when the cuffs were removed, the way Cole's eyes darted to the camera row, measuring angles, the barely perceptible exhale of relief when he spotted his lawyer, well-known, expensive, confident, already at the defense table. And sitting several rows back, half swallowed by the crowd but unmistakable, Victor Maddox. He looked nothing like the powerful, thunderous heroes he played on screen. He looked small, not in stature, in spirit. His salt and pepper hair was more gray than the movies allowed. Deep lines cut through his forehead and the corners of his eyes. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, but he sank into the bench as if it weighed far too much. His hands were clasped in front of him, knuckles pale. He stayed very still. Cameras found him too. They always did. But this story, in this room, wasn't about him. Not anymore. It was about the man at the defense table who leaned forward now as if prepped for his big scene. Court was called to order. The murmurs died. All rise. Chairs scraped, shoes shuffled. Cole rose slower than most. His movements had the casual defiance of someone who knew he couldn't outright refuse, but also knew he didn't have to hurry. Judge Wapner took his seat. The room sat with him. Everyone except Cole, who dropped back into his chair a fraction too soon. Half a heartbeat before the judge had fully settled. The bailiff's eyes flicked his way. Wapner's didn't. Not yet. But he had noticed. He always did. The charges were read: assault causing bodily injury, destruction of property, violation of probation. It wasn't his first time in front of a judge, but this time was different. Last time there had been a deal, a soft landing arranged in a conference room away from cameras, an agreement, no more trouble, community service, a stern lecture for the cameras, and a carefully worded statement about getting help. He had nodded, promised, smiled, then gone right back out. Another party, another fight, another person who didn't move fast enough when he wanted something. This time, the victim hadn't bounced back in 24 hours. He was still in the hospital. 3 fractured ribs, a concussion, internal bleeding. All of it for one simple reason. He had refused to let Cole Maddox shove his girlfriend against the wall outside a bar. It was on video. Not perfectly framed, not crystal clear, but clear enough. Enough to show fists, enough to show boots, enough to show a man on the ground and another man with a famous face and an arrogant grin towering over him. The prosecution laid it out without theatrics. They didn't need them. The facts were already heavy. Time, place, injury reports, probation terms, the previous second chance he had been given. The courtroom watched clips on a monitor, pausing, rewinding, slow motion. There was no soundtrack, no dramatic score, just the raw sound of impact and slurred shouting.
Cole watched too, but not con shame, more con un distancé, bitter annoyance, as if the footage was flawed, as if he were watching un bad angle of himself in un movie he hadn't approved. His lawyer kept un calm, polished expression, waiting for su turn. He had a strategy. He always did. Character references, emotional context, substance abuse, the pressure de growing up in a shadow of fame. The story would be crafted, shaped, presented. The kind of story that made guilty men look complicados instead de dangerous. But there was one element of this production he couldn't control: the man on the bench. Judge Wapner didn't rush. He let the room sit with his images, with the hospital photos, with the probation paperwork. He watched the defendant's face throughout, the briefing, the blinking, the almost casual glances toward the camera. Cole was waiting, not just for su lawyer, for the moment. The moment where someone, somewhere in un suit would lean forward and say, "We can work this out." The moment where things bent. They always had. Why would now be different? He didn't understand yet that he was mistaking the room. This wasn't a negotiation table. It was un line. And he had crossed it twice. The prosecutor rested. The defense began. The defense lawyer stood with practiced ease. He was good, too good. He talked about pressure, about tabloids, about paparazzi shoving cameras into a teenager's face, about nights when Cole couldn't leave his house without being harassed, about growing up with a father who belonged to the world más do que a sua família. He painted a picture, not of a predator, but of un wounded, aimless man, a produto de fame, not un perpetrador de violence. There was a rhythm to his words, crafted for headlines. He spoke of addiction, of unhealthy coping mechanisms, of therapy sessions scheduled but not attended, now finally being taken seriously. He acknowledged responsibility, just enough. He nunca said innocent. He didn't need to. His goal was different. Reduce, reframe, redirect. He leaned heavily on one word: rehabilitation. The gallery shifted. Some people frowned. Some rolled their eyes. Others looked unconvinced, but interesado, waiting for the twist. Waiting to see if his famous last name would, once again, soften the hard edge of the law. And then, almost as if he'd been waiting for a perfect moment, the lawyer said it. The line that changed the air in the room. Your Honor, my client is not asking to be treated differently because of who he is, he said smoothly. But we cannot ignore the positive impact his rehabilitation, in the public eye, could have on many others struggling with similar issues. The phrase hung there. In the public eye. It was subtle, but not to everyone. Not to the man on the bench. Judge Wapner's eyes narrowed by a fraction. The lawyer went on. He has a platform, he continued. He has influence. A harsh sentence with incarceration doesn't just punish him. It wastes una oportunidad.
With structured treatment, probation, strict conditions, and guidance, he can become one example, a message, a symbol of how even someone from privilege can change and help others. There it was, the ask, not stated directly, but obvious. No prison, or as little as possible, because he had value, because he had visibility, because he had a famous father and an audience. The lawyer sat, calm, certain that the fusion of apology and opportunity had landed. Cole looked satisfied. This was familiar. This was the script he knew. He wasn't hearing about guilt, harm, consequences. He was hearing words he understood. Brand, redemption arc, public narrative. A rock bottom he could later mention in a talk show with a quivering voice and a humble smile. In the third row, Victor Maddox closed his eyes for a moment. He knew this pattern too. He'd seen it in co-stars, directors, producers. The same cycle. Fall, PR, comeback. Except this time, he wasn't sure he wanted the comeback. Not like this, not bought, polished, sold. He opened his eyes, looked at his son, saw himself, years ago, playing a defiant younger man on a screen, begging a fictional judge for mercy he didn't deserve, before the script gave it to him anyway. But this wasn't scripted. This was real. And Judge Joseph Wapner knew the difference. Silence settled after the defense rested. It wasn't empty. It was charged, waiting, watching. Judge Wapner folded his hands. He rested them on the bench, fingers interlaced. His eyes moved slowly from the paperwork in front of him to the man at the defense table. "Mr. Maddox," he said evenly, "stand." This time, Cole stood quickly. Everyone noticed. The swagger had dimmed, replaced by a thread of tension. He smoothed his tie, lifted his chin, prepared himself mentally for the speech, the warning, the probation, the opportunity to walk out, framed as a changed man. He was ready for the version of justice he'd grown up watching, the one where words, money, and names could soften the blow. He was not ready for what actually came. "Mr. Maddox," Wapner began, his tone controlled, "you are here today not for the first time, but for the second." He glanced down at the file. "You were given probation in a prior case involving alcohol, violence, and reckless conduct. You were told, very clearly, that any further incident would carry serious consequences." Cole's jaw tightened. He stared straight ahead. "Yet, within that probation period," the judge continued, "you engaged in conduct that placed another man in the hospital. Not a scratch, not a bruise, serious injuries, broken bones, a brain injury under observation." He paused. "Do you understand that?" Yes, Your Honor," Cole said, voice low. This was the part where he was supposed to sound remorseful, generic, carefully regretful without admitting too much. But Wapner didn't ask for elaboration. He didn't ask for apologies. He already had enough words. He needed something else. "What I have heard today," the judge went on, "from your counsel is that you have had a difficult life no shadow of fame, that you have struggled with substances, that you have felt a pressure, the attention, that you are now, finally, ready a change." He let the last words carry a faint edge. Not anger, skepticism. Your attorney has suggested, he continued, that your position, your platform, your visibility are reasons to spare you a prison sentence, that keeping you out of custody will allow you to serve as some sort of public example. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam anything. He simply let the absurdity of it drift into the open air. Cole shifted. For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. Not at the idea of prison, not yet, at the tone, at the way his lawyer's argument was being taken apart, brick by brick. What I have not heard, Wapner said, eyes fixed on him now, is genuine recognition of what you did to another human being. I have not heard you speak about the man on the pavement, about the fear he felt, about the pain he is still in. He leaned forward, just slightly. Have you thought about him, Mr. Maddox? The defendant blinked. He hadn't expected a direct question. The gallery grew even quieter. I regret what happened, Cole said slowly. I was drunk. Being drunk, Wapner cut in, is not an explanation. It is an aggravation, given that you were already on probation for behavior involving alcohol. I asked if you have thought about him, not about yourself, about him. A flush crept up Cole's neck. He glanced at his lawyer. The lawyer gave the smallest nod. Yes, Your Honor, Cole said, attempting sincerity. I've thought about him a lot. I didn't mean for things to go that far. I just lost control. It's not who I really am. A predictable line, a familiar one, the kind that played well in interviews, where the follow-up questions were gentle, sympathetic, rehearsed. Judge Wapner was not an interviewer, and this was not a redemption special. His next words were quiet and surgical. How many times, he asked, have you used some version of that sentence in the last 5 years? Cole frowned. Excuse me? That wasn't a rhetorical question, the judge replied calmly. You said, it's not who I really am. How many times have you said that in police stations, in courtrooms, to family, to press, after a bar incident, after a fight, after a reckless act? A ripple of awareness moved through the room. People shifted, eyes widening. The pattern, dragged into the light. Cole swallowed. I don't know, he muttered. Too many to count? Wapner pressed. Silence. Then, softly, yes. Then allow me to suggest something, the judge said, voice still even. At a certain point, Mr. Maddox, it stops being something you say after you lose control and starts being exactly who you are. The line hit like a punch. There was no gasp from the gallery, just a hard, collective stillness. Like watching a mask crack in slow motion. Cole's lips parted. He didn't speak. For the first time, his expression wasn't bored, or mildly amused, or faintly irritated. It was bare, confused, cornered, like a man who had walked into a familiar room only to find all the exits gone. Judge Wapner turned a page in the file. You are not here because you are the son of a famous actor, he said. You are here because you made choices, deliberate choices. You chose to drink. You chose to go out on probation. You chose to use your size, your entourage, your status to intimidate and hurt someone who stood between you and what you wanted. He flipped another page. 3 witnesses, he continued, state that you said, and I quote, "Do you know who I am?" right before the altercation escalated. The words echoed. Everyone in the room felt the weight of them. There it was, the line, the shield, the phrase people used when they were used to doors opening on command. Yes, Your Honor, Cole said quickly, defensive now, but I was drunk. I didn't mean it like... You meant it exactly as it sounded, Wapner said, cutting through his excuse. You meant, I am someone the rules do not apply to. I am someone who should not be touched, not be challenged, not be stopped. He stared directly at him now, unblinking. Mr. Maddox, he said, I am going to answer that question for you. The one you throw around when you're drunk, when you're angry, when someone dares to stand up to you. The entire room leaned forward. You could almost hear the collective inhale. "Do you know who I am?" he repeated, voice low. "In this courtroom, you are a defendant, nothing more, nothing less." The humiliation was clean, surgical, total. No shouting, no insults, just the stripping away of everything Cole thought made him special. The gallery felt it physically. A man in the back nodded, slow and grim. A woman in the front row pressed a hand to her mouth. Even the cameraman, so used to capturing tears and drama, stood a little straighter. They knew they had just recorded the moment this case would be shared 1,000,000 times. Cole's shoulders sank by a fraction. The smirk was gone. His eyes, for the first time, looked smaller. You could see it, the moment he understood. His father's name could not lift him out of this sentence. This wasn't a movie. There was no final monologue that would turn the tide. There was only a judge who had seen this pattern before and was done with it. In the third row, Victor Maddox closed his eyes again. This time, not to block anything out, but because something in the judge's words hit him too. "Do you know who I am?" He had heard his son say that sentence more times than he could count. At restaurants, at parties, at airports. Each time, he had been too tired, too guilty, or too cowardly to correct him. He had let the world, the industry, the fans answer the question for him. Now, for the first time, he heard the only answer that mattered. In here, you are a defendant. And it wasn't just his son on trial anymore. It was entitlement, legacy, every free pass they had quietly accepted. He opened his eyes and looked at the bench. There was no triumph in his gaze, only something like gratitude and shame. Judge Wapner wasn't finished. "The idea," he said, turning back to the lawyer's argument, "that your platform should be a factor in sparing you a sentence of incarceration is deeply troubling to me." He spoke calmly, but his words had an iron core. "There are people," he continued, "who come through this courtroom every day. They have no famous parent, no fan base, no press, no platform." He glanced briefly at the gallery. At best, they have 2 friends in the back row hoping they get a fair outcome. They work 2 jobs. They share cramped apartments. They make mistakes too. Some of them are fighting addictions, childhood trauma, poverty. They do not get to stand where you're standing and argue that their story makes them valuable enough to avoid consequences. He looked back at Cole. "That argument," he said flatly, "is an argument for more privilege, not for justice." The line hit hard. Online, it would later become a caption, a quote graphic, 1,000 shared clips. In the room, it felt like air returning after being held too long. "Justice," he went on, "requires that the law apply equally. That means you do not get more leniency because people recognize your face, because you grew up in a mansion instead of a housing project, because your worst moments are filmed." He paused. "If anything," he added, "your visibility should have made you more cautious, more responsible, not more reckless." Cole stared at the floor. The defensive fire in him warred with something else, rage, fear. The dawning understanding that this man truly, genuinely did not care who his father was. Not a little, not at all. His lawyer tried to salvage what he could. He rose, voice measured. "Your Honor, with respect, my client is committed to treatment now. A custodial sentence could derail." "A custodial sentence," Wapner replied, "is the direct, logical result of his actions, not an obstacle to his growth, a condition of it." He looked at Cole again. "You think of yourself as the protagonist of a story, Mr. Maddox," he said. "In movies, the protagonist hits a low point, learns a lesson, and is rewarded with a chance to prove he's changed. Real life does not work that way. You do not get the reward before you endure the consequence. You could almost feel the script in Cole's head being ripped apart, page by page, scene by scene. His imagined future, the teary talk show, the memoir, the redemption interviews, all of it hinged on getting out of this room with a lighter sentence, with something survivable, something spinnable, something he could overcome publicly. That future was dissolving, sentence by sentence. It was time. The room knew. The judge straightened, hand steady, voice unhurried. "For the violations of your probation," he began, "for the new offense committed while that probation was active, and feel a severity of the victim's injuries, this court is obligated to impose a sentence that reflects not just your need for rehabilitation, but the need for public safety and accountability." The words public safety landed like lead. Cole's throat worked. You could see him swallow. "That accountability," Wapner continued, "cannot exist without confinement." His lawyer closed his eyes briefly. He knew. Everyone did. "In considering the appropriate length of that confinement," the judge said, "I have taken into account your prior record, the opportunities already extended to you, and your attitude throughout these proceedings." He didn't sugarcoat it. "Your behavior here," he went on, "has been characterized by minimal insight into the harm you've caused and a persistent belief that your circumstances deserve special treatment." He paused. "That ends today." Silence. Total. Heavy. "You are hereby sentenced," Judge Wapner stated, each word a weight, "to serve a term of incarceration in county custody, followed by a strict period of supervised release with mandatory treatment and zero tolerance for further violations." He named the duration. Substantial. Not life-destroying, but real, visible, tangible, long enough to shatter entitlement, short enough to allow change, if he wanted it. The words hit Cole like a physical impact. His shoulders jerked, his knees almost buckled. He clutched the edge of the defense table suddenly, knuckles whitening. He bit the inside of his cheek, trying to hold the mask in place. But the cameras caught the flinch. They always do. They caught the brief, naked terror that flashed across his face. The moment realization replaced assumption. He was going to prison, not rehab, not a wellness retreat with meditation and Instagram quotes. Prison, bars, cells, numbers instead of names. The gallery reacted in quiet bursts. A sharp inhale here, a slow nod there. Someone whispered, barely audible, "Finally." It wasn't cruelty. It was something else. A release. A validation that the world still had lines that could not be stepped over without cost. Even for people like him. Especially for people like him. But Wapner wasn't done. There was one more cut. The deepest one. "Mr. Maddox," he said, his tone shifting from procedural to personal, "I want you to listen to me carefully now." Cole forced himself to look up. His eyes were bright, glittering with a sheen he didn't want the cameras to catch. He blinked hard, kept his jaw tight. "Your father's roles," the judge said, "have often involved fighting for justice, playing men who stand up for the powerless, for the innocent, for the abused." He glanced briefly at Victor in the gallery. The actor held his gaze, eyes shining with something that looked dangerously close to tears. "You have taken that legacy," Wapner went on, "and used it as a shield to avoid living under the very same principles those roles represented." He returned his gaze to Cole. "You tried to use his name," he said, "to walk away from the harm you caused, to step over the man you put in the hospital, to keep your life uninterrupted, your narrative clean, your image intact." His voice hardened. "In this courtroom, that stops." Here, your father's performances are just films. His awards are just metal. His reputation is his. It is not a currency you can spend to buy your freedom." He leaned in slightly. "In here," he repeated, "only your choices matter." The words stripped everything else away. Fame, fortune, bloodline, gone. This wasn't just a sentence. It was exile from the world he thought would always catch him. "And if there is any chance," Wapner added, "that you will become the man you keep insisting you really are, it will not be because you avoided prison. It will be because you faced it, fully, honestly, without hiding behind a last name." A slow, trembling exhale escaped Cole before he could stop it. His shoulders slumped. For the first time, his expression wasn't crafted, wasn't defensive, wasn't court-ready. It was simply human, afraid, uprooted, alone. "Take him into custody," the judge said quietly. The bailiff stepped forward. The click of the cuffs around Cole's wrists sounded louder than any gavel. He flinched at the sound, not because it hurt, because it was real, irreversible, final. He turned his head instinctively toward the gallery, toward his father. Their eyes met. There was no rescue in that look, no deal, no backstage pass. Just an older man with tired eyes giving his son the only thing left he could offer, a nod. A small, devastating nod that said silently, "This is yours, not mine. Live it, learn from it, or don't." The guards led him away. Each step toward the side door felt like a step out of the world he knew. The cameras followed. They always do. But this time, there was no performance, no practiced angle. Just a young man with his illusions in chains being walked into the reality he thought he'd never have to face. Outside the courtroom, the story exploded. Clips of Judge Wapner saying, "In this courtroom, you are a defendant, nothing more, nothing less," ricocheted across social media. People replayed the moment he refused to consider platform as a reason for mercy. Journalists dissected his line about privilege versus justice. Comment sections filled with stories. "I grew up watching Victor Maddox, never thought I'd see his kid get real time. Respect to the judge." Finally, someone said what needs to be said. Fame is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. "I've seen guys with nothing get years for less. This feels fair for once." There was anger, too, from fans, from people who still believed their idols' families deserved softer landings. "You have taken that legacy," Wapner went on, "and used it as a shield to avoid leaving under the very same principles those roles represented." He returned his gaze to Cole. "You tried to use his name," he said, "to walk away from the harm you caused, to step over the man you put in the hospital, to keep your life uninterrupted, your narrative clean, your image intact." His voice hardened. "In this courtroom, that stops. Here, your father's performances are just films. His awards are just metal. His reputation is his. It is not a currency you can spend to buy your freedom." He leaned in slightly. "In here," he repeated, "only your choices matter." The word stripped everything else away. Fame, fortune, bloodline, gone. This wasn't just a sentence, it was exile from the world he thought would always catch him. "And if there is any chance," Wapner added, "that you will become the man you keep insisting you really are, it will not be because you avoided prison. It will be because you faced it, fully, honestly, without hiding behind a last name." A slow, trembling exhale escaped Cole before he could stop it. His shoulders slumped. For the first time, his expression wasn't crafted, wasn't defensive, wasn't court-ready. It was simply human, afraid, uprooted, alone. "Take him into custody," the judge said quietly. The bailiff stepped forward. The click of the cuffs around Cole's wrists sounded louder than any gavel. He flinched at the sound, not because it hurt, because it was real, irreversible, final. He turned his head, instinctively, toward the gallery, toward his father. Their eyes met. There was no rescue in that look, no deal, no backstage pass. Just an older man, with tired eyes, giving his son the only thing left he could offer. A nod. A small, devastating nod that said, silently, "This is yours, not mine. Live it, learn from it, or don't, but it's yours." The guards led him away. Each step toward the side door felt like a step out of the world he knew. The cameras followed. They always do. But this time, there was no performance, no practiced angle. Just a young man with his illusions in chains, being walked into the reality he thought he'd never have to face. Outside the courtroom, the story exploded. Clips of Judge Wapner saying, "In this courtroom, you are a defendant, nothing more, nothing less," ricocheted across social media. People replayed the moment he refused to consider platform as a reason for mercy. Journalists dissected his line about privilege versus justice. Comment sections filled with stories. "I grew up watching Victor Maddox. Never thought I'd see his kid get real time. Respect to the judge." Finally, someone said what needs to be said. Fame is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. I've seen guys with nothing get years for less. This feels fair for once. There was anger, too, from fans, from people who still believe their idols' families deserved softer landings. But their voices were drowned out by something deeper, more consistent: relief. The relief of milhões de ordinárias pessoas que haviam visto ricos melões saírem de reques, escândalos e bodes. Que haviam visto mugshots desaparecer, charges resolvidos, headlines fade, all because of a last name. This time, the last name wasn't enough. It was on camera, preservado, replayável, undeniable. Inside, when the cameras finally stopped rolling, the courtroom emptied slowly. People walked out in clusters, murmurando. Uma mulher em scrubs shook her head, mutando. About time someone said it. A young man with tattoos on his neck smiled tightly to himself, a strange glint in his eye. "Judge went off," he whispered, half in awe. "Said what my P.O. never does." Victor Maddox remained seated long after others stood. He watched the door his son had just disappeared through. For a long time, he didn't move. The courtroom staff gave him his space. A man whose face had filled so many screens, now small and alone on a wooden bench. Finally, he rose. As he passed the council tables, he looked up at the bench. Judge Wapner was stacking papers, speaking quietly to a clerk. He didn't notice the actor at first. Then he did. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged. None were needed. In that split-second look, there was no resentment from Victor, only pain, and something like gratitude. He gave the slightest nod, a real one this time, respectful, honest. Then he turned and walked out, not like a star, like a father, carrying the weight of a legacy finally forced to separate from the man who had been hiding behind it. Online, the video was cut, edited, and repackaged 100 ways. Some focused on the son, his arrogance, his fall. Others focused on the father, his silence, his face as the sentence was read. But the version that went viral the fastest was the one centered on the judge, on his calm dismantling of the platform argument, on his line about justice requiring equal application of the law,
on his refusal to let the room forget the victim, whose name never trended, whose face never faced the poster, whose life might never be the same. The narrative that emerged was not just about a privileged man going to prison. It was about a fragile, stubborn idea that in certos rooms, under certos olhos, money and fame still bend. That some benches cannot be bought. That some gavels still fall the way they were always meant to, straight, unmoved, unimpressed. Under those lights, in that narrow room, the glamorous blur of celebrity had been peeled away. What remained was simple. A man, his choices, their consequences, and an older man on the bench, steady as bedrock, reminding everyone watching, inside and out, that there are places where the story does not revolve around you, your name, your brand, where the question, "Do you know who I am?" has only one answer that matters. Yes, you are accountable.